and welcome to This is USG, a video podcast by the universities at Shady Grove. 9 universities, 1 campus, great results. I'm Ann Khademian, Executive Director of the universities at Shady Grove. As a regional higher education center in the university system of Maryland, USG plays a key role in meeting the workforce development and economic development priorities of Montgomery County and the state of Maryland. As USG takes the next big step to plan for our future, we will work closely with our partners across the university system of Maryland, across Montgomery County, and especially our legislative leadership in Annapolis. Tonight's guest has served the people of Montgomery County in the state legislature since 2018. In his role as Vice Chair for the Education and Economic Development Subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee of the Maryland House of Delegates, his legislative priorities focus on public health, public education, and the economy. It is my pleasure to welcome Delegate Jared Solomon of District 18 as our special guest this evening. Welcome, Delegate Solomon, to This is USG.
Thank you, Ann. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to have you as a constituent as well. Not only a great leader in our county with the universities of Shady Grove too.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me, and very, very happy to have you as our representative as well. So thank you. You're relatively new to the legislature. You've been extremely busy in your 2 years, which is fantastic. But I've read that you were a teacher. You've worked in Baltimore. You worked in the DC public schools. You worked in the federal government, working for Representative Casey at one point from Pennsylvania. Could you tell us how did you find this path to serving the public, to public service, and to be an elected official? What brought you to this point?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. I'm a product of 2 Peace Corps volunteers. Both of my parents served in the Peace Corps when they were a little bit younger than I am now, and so that's kind of what I was raised with, and I wasn't nearly adventurous enough to pick up and move halfway across the world. My wife and I actually we met both doing Teach for America. She taught 2nd grade in Prince George's County, and I taught high school social studies in Baltimore. And always had just a real passion for public service and in politics. And my time as a teacher really was eye-opening in how public policy really influences what happens in education. And it was sort of, you were often told, just shut your door and focus on your students and teach, but you really couldn't do that. You had to know what kind of policies were the city council making, what kind of policies were the central office or the state or the federal government for that matter. And so I knew I loved my experience as a teacher, but I knew that wasn't sort of the long-term career for me. I was really interested in policy, but I wanted to know what do the policies really mean on the ground, and how do they impact the families, that are affected by them? And I think a lot about the students that I taught and the families that I worked with when I was in Baltimore. And then when I worked for DC Public Schools, I did sort of community relations, and the team was called the Critical Response Team. We were nicknamed the DCPS Firefighters, and we were literally tasked with just problem solving and helping people navigate, the central office and figuring out how to work with other government agencies within the DC city government. And I think a lot about those families when I make policy now. And so, it was always kind of an interest to me to see, okay, well, now that I'm working at a school system level, what are the policies that the federal government really has put down, that are impacting what our superintendent is doing and what our teachers and our principals have to do. And, so I went over and started doing federal policy work, and it was always something, I was always really interested in spending time on Capitol Hill. And, I'm originally from, I say now, the other Montgomery County. I grew up outside of Philadelphia. And when the opportunity came to work for Senator Casey, I was really honored to take the position of doing really education policy, immigration policy work for him on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in the Senate. And was really there when we got to rewrite the No Child Left Behind law. It only took 15 years for that to happen, but to be able to represent my home state and work for a senator who cared deeply about education issues, what happened with children, early childhood policy, higher education policy, and it was an incredible experience. And frankly, it was almost a dream job, to get to walk through and make laws that impact the entire country and benefit the entire country. But with 2016 and the election that happened 4 years ago now, I was just frustrated. I mean, we had a lot of really, positive ideas and things that we had been laying out, and frankly, the administration that came in, to me, I know these are my personal beliefs. They may not, be the beliefs of everybody, who's part of USG, but for me, I became really frustrated that I felt like there was so much gridlock at the federal level. That what we were doing was playing defense on a lot of issues. That, to me, the states were really a place where a lot of work could get done, and it's an amazing experience being in Annapolis. There's so much less partisanship. There's so much more problem solving, I think, that goes forward. And so, I had thought about, maybe at some point later in life, running for public office. When you spend so much time with good elected officials, you kind of learn what it takes to, to do it well. And I love the experience I had with Senator Casey. And for us in Montgomery County, in my district, we had 2 vacancies come open for our House of Delegates seats. And that almost never happens. I don't think that's been the case for almost 15 years. And I said, you know what? I'm frustrated with what I see every day in Washington. I think I have ideas that I hope people will appreciate and will resonate with folks in Annapolis. And I decided to throw my hat in the ring in 2017, and I guess we did something right, and it was an amazing experience to run, and frankly, one of the most humbling things to have people actually cast their vote for you, it's been a great ride so far for the 3 years.
It's so terrific. I have to say, first of all, I meant to say Senator Casey. My apologies. I misspoke there. What I hear from you, Jared, I hear, first of all, tremendous passion and respect for the people you serve, and wanting to do the best you can for friends, neighbors, your fellow citizens, the people around you, which is just wonderful. I also hear just a real drive to be a problem solver, and if you can't fix it in the school district, you got to look up a level, you got to look up a level, you got to look up a level. So I think that's driving you maybe to other opportunities as well. But that's terrific. I mean, I think that's what really great problem solvers do, is they keep taking a bigger view and trying to use the tools at hand. So that's terrific. Well, speaking of problem solving, COVID-19 has just rocked our world, and I think this week marks the 1 year turning point of when everything shut down. We all closed up shop and went virtual. We did that here at USG and across all the schools, and even the legislature is meeting virtually now in Annapolis. From where you're sitting, Jared, how are we doing? How is the state of Maryland doing? And where are you seeing signs of hope in terms of being able to organize and kind of find our way out of this? And where are the challenge points still, and the things that you're working on as a legislator to try to address some of these challenges?
I think before we even get into that, I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, it's almost unheard. I mean, it's crazy to almost even say it, but the more than 500,000 people who have lost their lives, and I'm sure many of us and many of your students and your staff have been impacted by it. Whether through the loss of loved ones or friends, I just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that. But I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's I think the vaccine rollout has been a little rocky. But we're making lots of progress, and hopefully this point next year, life has returned at least to some semblance of normal. In Annapolis, I have to say it's been a year like no other, and I hope in no point in the near future do we have to repeat it. But we've been able to, frankly, do amazing work with a virtual legislature. So we have, early on this year and late last year, the Speaker and Speaker Jones and Senate President Ferguson, put a plan together for both the House and the Senate to, really utilize the new technology that we have available, and with the best medical guidance, figure out a way that we could be together safely while doing the people's business. We only have a 90-day legislative session, and because of our state constitution, we have to be in person for a lot of our work, particularly the Senate. The House of Delegates, we have a little bit more flexibility with our committee work, but the Senate is meeting in person almost every day. And, knock on wood, up to this point, we have not had any major outbreaks. We've been able to continue, and now the House meets regularly in person on an almost daily basis. And we've been able to work, through our committees virtually, and on the Appropriations Committee where I serve, we're wrapping up the work on the budget, and it's been incredible. There's so many moving pieces, with the agencies that we have oversight over and all the different hearings, and we've been able to do it through Zoom. It's not ideal, but I think it's allowed, frankly, so many more people to have access to our work. You don't have to come to Annapolis to testify anymore. You don't have to, a lot of our hearings were not streamed live last year. Now everything is streamed and posted publicly on the General Assembly's YouTube page. It's all linked on the General Assembly's website. So, anyone who's interested in a bill can see everything that's going on, can have a window into our voting sessions. And frankly, we've already passed major COVID relief legislation. We've passed major expansion of the earned income tax credit that will provide, relief for working families. And we expanded it. Frankly, we now have one of the most generous state credits in the country. I think the budget that we're going to pass, at least in the House next week, is going to be, full of great things for higher education and for families. And we've been able to do it, again, navigating a crazy health situation. I think, those are the positives. And I guess the other positive I'll add is, the fiscal situation, I think, for the state is much better than many of us imagined. And I don't think anyone was particularly happy that, the university system in particular had to take such a large cut, back in July from the Board of Public Works. But at that point, the governor, I think, was worried that our fiscal situation was not going to be healthy. We saw some sort of doomsday scenarios that looked like, the state could be facing a $2 billion budget shortfall. Fortunately, that didn't happen. And that's a testament, frankly, to, the work of USG and our institutions across the state, because we have such a highly educated workforce. Our taxes didn't take that much of a hit. For a large segment of the population, folks are able to work remotely. They have, those kind of jobs. And so we were still taking in a good bit of tax revenue that allowed our budget to really stabilize and frankly rebound. And the stimulus money that we've gotten from the federal government, and it looks like Congress is about to pass another huge stimulus package that I think will be finalized this week, is going to bring another level of resources to our state that will allow us, frankly, to to continue to recover. And I think the dark area that we have is, for a lot of your students and families, how do we make it so that people haven't lost ground? And those folks who did, how are we making those investments to make sure that they're able to recover, that for folks who lost their jobs and those jobs may not come back, then we have, the educational resources and tools available to have them, get retraining and get back into the workforce, and really think, how do we take advantage of all the great work we're doing in life sciences here? And that, I think, is the big next step. And fortunately, because of the work at the federal level and our state's fiscal situation, it's going to be, I think, a lot easier than many of us imagined it might be.
Yeah, well, that's a great overview of that great work that the legislature is doing, and very hopeful as well. You mentioned the opportunities in the life sciences, in the biotechnology and bioscience. USG is right here in that corridor. Heard it referred to as DNA Valley before. We're right here in that spot. You also mentioned the need for retraining and kind of point of need learning, right? So not necessarily the traditional path which we many of our students coming to get their bachelor's degree, but people who may want to be retrained and to transition from one industry to another. And the term that I've heard used is adaptive lifelong learning. To be in that space. We think that USG is really well poised to help in this economic recovery, and we are doing a lot of work in this space already. Could you share with me a little bit? You're a very innovative thinker around education, and how do you think the pandemic and this moment in time is going to change the way the state or the counties kind of think about education and think about, it could be everything from K through 12 through higher education. I can see big changes are going to happen in higher education, but I'm wondering, from where you sit, what do the changes look like in the education landscape for you from a policy perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some stuff that's sort of become evident, but frankly, I think it's going to be, one of the sort of, from a policy perspective, fascinating things to watch is what are those changes that we need to embrace, that that we're going to have to we're going to have to adapt to. I mean, I think first off, I think for some people, virtual learning has been really helpful. I think at the K-12 level, but in higher ed, and to your point of sort of those adaptive lifelong learning situations where we may not need people to come in person all the time. That, if somebody can engage for a shorter period of time with an online course that maybe is more accommodating to a schedule if they are in the workforce, or they need to be at work providing for their family. Can we adapt what we've got, and maybe it's weekend classes or occasional evening work as opposed to an everyday thing. But I think it's really what I think we're going to see is that there are jobs that, because we've now been able to automate or move into a more virtual position, they may not come back. And so it's really thinking about, now that we've got this move to a more, I think, sort of distant society in some sense, that is going to take a while to recover. How are we embracing the new technologies? How are we embracing, to your point, the life science? I mean, Novavax could potentially be, the next great, Fortune 500 company with the work that they're doing. And, same with American Genetics, that's based in Rockville. And so how are we providing the workforce, in our region, for those companies to be able to continue to stay here? And how are we helping grow the next generation of those companies? And I think you're exactly right. I mean, USG's bioscience facility, I mean, that is a world-class facility, and we've got to make sure that it's full of, companies and students who are bringing the next great, brilliant ideas to scale. And we've got to make sure at a state level that we're funding that and we're enabling that work to be done.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the BSE, the Biosciences Engineering Building. It's that incredible state investment that's here on the campus, the LEED Platinum certified building. It is just an incredible space, but it needs to be thriving and hopping. And because of COVID, it still is a little bit quiet, but we will definitely get there. One of the things that we've been focusing on at Shady Grove, and I know something that you've been very interested in as well, is thinking about pathways for students. So not just hoping that students find their way into college, but giving them a pathway, a vision towards that. And so we work with Montgomery County Public Schools, with Montgomery College and other community colleges as well, to help students find their way from an associate's degree then into a four-year degree here. And really thinking about, how do we strengthen that pipeline? How do we make that smoother for students? Not all students have the experience or the family experience of going into college, and so it's a new experience for them. And how to get there and what to do is a new thing. We have the ACES program that's really a really important part of that pipeline. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, from a state perspective, does the state take a role in trying to promote these kinds of pipelines? These are direct pathways into filling that biosciences and engineering building and producing students who can go out and be the next innovator of the Novavax vaccine, right? So I wonder, could you talk a little bit about how the state sees this challenge in terms of building these pipelines and these opportunities?
Yeah, well, and I will say, I mean, I think USG is the model really for, for especially for populations of students where the traditional path may not be the right one or the easiest for them. It's a model I think that we should be embracing more fully, frankly, across the state. So we did a lot of work on that. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we officially passed, I guess, this year, was the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is based on the Kirwan Commission's 3 years worth of work. We passed the sort of big set of policies last year. The governor vetoed it, in May, and we came back in January and overrode his veto. And now, we're really trying to figure out, as we begin to implement the bill and what kind of changes, frankly, it's amazing to think how different the world was last year when that bill was going through the General Assembly than it is today. So we're thinking about, what are the policies within the Kirwan recommendations that are in that bill that we can adapt and change. And, one of the things I didn't mention into your earlier question was, for a lot of students, particularly lower income students, there are a lot of families who may now not be able to afford college because of the economic situation that they've been faced with, or students who, frankly, may have had to drop out of high school because they had to get a job to help support their families. And so what we really need a commitment in, in every level of education is getting those students and those families to understand these are the resources that are available to you. These are the systems that will help you navigate. One of the bills that I'm really proud of that, fingers crossed, will hopefully get to the governor's desk this year. We just passed it out of the House last week. It's called the Transfer with Success Act, and it's really, very, I think, common sense policy in most people's minds of getting both schools you're transferring to and the schools you're transferring from, primarily our community college system and USM in Maryland, to talk to one another. And if you have a student who, for some reason or another, a course didn't transfer, sometimes just that opportunity of the two, the two entities talking to one another, having the counselors get on the phone and saying, oh, we do have a memorandum of understanding with, school X, Y, or Z. This course should transfer. Could make such a difference. And then, collecting data on the courses that don't transfer so that, the university system can have regular conversations with the community college system. Because we've heard stories where literally, the same professor will teach a class, at Frostburg while also teaching at, Baltimore County Community College. But, one entity has a different requirement for their class. And so even though that professor is teaching basically the same material, the course might not have transferred. And, to me, this is a real starting point, because I think, and I think USM is already doing this kind of work, is really embracing how we create a more integrated system. I think what makes you all really successful is you view Montgomery College in many senses as almost a feeder school. And I think our community college system across the state could really be that entity for USM, for students who, they may be apprehensive about going to a four-year school, or they're not quite prepared yet. And so a community college may provide a better set of experiences for them, or supports, that first year, or they don't want to go away from home because their family needs the help, and really saying, how do we get, or they can't afford it, and go to a community college where it's a little cheaper, knock out some of your gen eds, and then transfer to our amazing, university system and our four-year schools. And when we have that pipeline to get, as you were saying, to get students there, but that's got to start with financial aid, education, and work in ninth grade, and the blueprint bill is really putting an emphasis on students being ready for college, really at the end of 10th grade. So those 11th and 12th grade years are either a dual enrollment program, or if you need remediation, you're caught up, so that when you truly graduate high school, you're either well on your way to an associate's degree or to a bachelor's degree, or you are at least on grade level and ready to immediately tackle your college.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you mentioned the Kerwin legislation. That's such a game changer. When I hear you talking about this perspective, I hear a couple of things. One is, you really are focused on how these things are implemented. I think oftentimes legislators don't always get down into thinking about how are things going to be implemented, but how do you get people to talk to each other? How do you get people to share information? This is so important. And so the fact that you see that, it feels like you're drawing a lot on your own personal experience to be able to inform this. And I think that this is going to be so key, so key to the future. The other thing I hear, Jared, is that the kind of shifting perceptions of higher education. We have, and rightly so, a lot of pride in institutions that are highly ranked and very successful and that have been around for a long time, bringing tremendous public value to the world. I mean, this is, I'm the product of a lot of different universities and very proud of that experience. But I think COVID has shown us in such a painful way that not only the gaps in terms of access to healthcare and things, but access to education and the experiences, the life experiences of people, and how that conditions what people are able to do. And I think it's also shown a kind of pragmatic side for us as well, is that there are all these wonderful resources, and so if we do see education in I don't want to take the beauty and the experience out of education. I'm not trying to do that, but if we see it in a more pragmatic way, there are so many more options and so many more possibilities. And the students coming to USG, they're very motivated, they're highly driven, they've got their goals, and they just want to drive through and get it done, but they have a pretty cool experience while they're here at USG as well.
Yeah.
They experience leadership, they experience entrepreneurship. They meet all kinds of people. They're experiencing their classes in an incredibly diverse, wonderful setting with professors from all over the university system of Maryland. But do you agree with that? Do you agree that there's a kind of shift towards a more pragmatic perspective about how we do these things, or am I taking the am I putting too much of taking some of the beauty, if you will, out of all of this? I think the pragmatism shift is a really good thing, but I'm wondering what you think about that.
No, I think I actually think that's a really great way to describe it, that it's almost a more pragmatic view of things. I mean, look, there are always going to be students who want that sort of traditional, and I don't want to say one is traditional versus another, because I think that's, to your point, part of the problem. We have this, very, I think, incorrect traditional view of what higher education is, because for many of us, that's what it was. It was the 4-year school, you go away from home, but for, more and more and a larger percentage of our population, that's not traditional. And so I think what we need to look at is, how do we provide pathways and opportunities for students where they either can't or they don't want the 4-year experience. They want to, they want to be able to work. That's what's interesting to them. They want, a very laid out path that allows them to have multiple experiences and adapt to, different settings. And this idea that the only way that you can have, a quote unquote high quality education is by going away from home at a 4-year school that is, the same way in many ways that higher ed has looked for, for decades, I think is a really out of date approach. And you're right. I think it is taking a more pragmatic view that at the end of the day, it's about learning the skills and the critical thinking ability that you need to be successful. And whether you can get that, with 2 years at a community college and then going to a great school, great place like USG, or it is you've made that decision to go to a 4-year school, or if you, just need certificates or, targeted education in certain ways, it shouldn't be where you get it. It should be what that is that you're getting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the CEOs here in DNA Valley has hired a couple of our students, and he's referred to them as intellectual decathletes because they're able to solve problems, and they draw on their experience from Montgomery College, their kind of liberal arts experience, as well as the multidisciplinary technology experience. So he's thrilled with the way with the transition and how we're approaching this, and I think it's a really good sign. Well, I want to ask you one more question about the legislature before I get you to reflect on something else as well. Why appropriations? Why the Appropriations Committee? You've got this deep knowledge in education and health and the policy details. Not to say that you don't draw on that, but what drew you to the Appropriations Committee as opposed to one of the more specific substantive committees that you're interested in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was funny. I was just joking with a colleague about this last week. That really policy is appropriations. If we talk a lot about policy, and oftentimes if there isn't the money to back up that policy, then the policy is really just words on a paper. And so, I think that's where some of my experience on Capitol Hill really, taught me kind of the path that I wanted to take. When I worked for Senator Casey, we could get really great policy passed, but there was always that sort of other entity called the Appropriations Committee, and the federal budget process is a little different, but you could pass bills all you wanted, and then those appropriators would sit down and they would go through the federal budget with a fine-tooth comb, and they'd say, oh, it's great that committee X, Y, or Z passed this policy, but we really think it should be funded at this level instead. And sometimes it was more, most of the time it was substantially less. And this great bill that you spent maybe months and months and months or years working on was again just sort of a policy words on a paper. And so when I thought about where I wanted to be, it was really how do we put our money where our mouths are, frankly, and make sure that we're funding those kind of things properly. It's also, especially for a new legislator, an amazing education in how the state government works, because you literally, you have oversight over every agency and any entity that gets state funding. And so it's really been a crash course in learning about Annapolis and our state government. And I'm really lucky in the role that I serve, we get a little bit of both. So, we have oversight over the, really the budgets of the higher education system, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, the State Department of Education, but our committee also has the policy purview of higher ed. And so, from my perch, we get to set policy and we get to set the budget. We really get the best of everything. And appropriations, because it touches in so many areas, the Kerwin bill is, again, a perfect example. The policy, sort of the really nitty gritty policy, was set mostly by the Ways and Means Committee. It would have fallen in their jurisdiction. But because there was so much of that around the budget and where our money was going to go, appropriations worked hand in glove. And so, I've really been able to also influence policy and be a part of a lot of the decisions. A lot of the bills that come to Ways and Means are jointly referred often to our committee, and we have a great working relationship with our counterparts over there. And so, it's really interesting. And frankly, you get a lot of response from the agencies when they know that you have the ability to tweak their budget. They answer your emails, they return your calls very quickly, and it's a great way to make those connections and solve those problems that may not require legislation. It may require a phone call or a meeting, and sometimes you get a little bit more of an oomph when you have the keys to their cash box.
That's great. That's really, really great insight on the legislative process and on the roles of the committees. That's really helpful. I've enjoyed this so much, and I'm wondering if I can ask you to reflect on one more question. Taking us back to January 6th and, the insurrection on the Capitol, and, the country is divided in ways so deeply that we haven't seen for years. And, I feel like so much of the solution, so much of the way forward rests with education, and not to educate people to think certain things, but to be critical thinkers, to be critical consumers of knowledge, to be firm in their convictions, and to be able to assess what they take in. And I think that higher education in particular has a really important role to play in our democracy. And I see this with our students at Shady Grove. They were so intensely focused on the election and on the past 4 years, and kind of thinking about what outcomes mean and what voting means. And so we really had, for all of us, we've had such a lesson in civics and in voting and in our voice and exercising our voice. Do you see a connection, Jared, between kind of higher education, or what do you see as that we need to be lifting up and focusing on? We have a wonderful country and wonderful opportunities here, and we want to be sure that we can operate as a democracy. And I'm wondering what you think is where we should be focusing over the next couple of years to make sure that we preserve this and get stronger.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for raising it. I think you're exactly right. I mean, so much of the animus that we face is, sort of based on, I think, a misunderstanding of where lots of people are coming from. A misunderstanding of how the system works in many instances, or a lack of familiarity with it. I think writ large, we don't do a very good job of educating our citizens on what it means to be a citizen, on what civic engagement is, on how to navigate your government, how to engage with your elected officials, what the systems mean, and critical thought. I think media awareness in particular. It's the internet is incredible, and it's amazing to think what you have literally in the palm of your hands with a smartphone. But that also means that you have to be a much more discerning consumer. And I know the University of Maryland School of Public Policy is trying to do some of this work with a great curriculum. But I think at all levels we really need to educate particularly our young people on what it means to be a good consumer of news, and understand where you're getting your resources from. But also, I think, again, as you mentioned, it really just critical thinking. It's not about telling somebody what they need to know. It's how they can figure it out. I think you all do an amazing job of that. It's bringing real world experiences. It is, engaging with diverse communities that frankly sometimes people don't get. And I think when you've had the life experiences of seeing the world through different people's eyes or being in different people's shoes. It's a lot harder to be upset at the unknown, because you've sort of seen what it is, and even if you don't agree with it or another person's viewpoint, you can see where they're coming from. And I think that's, at the end of the day, higher education is about life experiences. It's about teaching people how to. It's giving people the tools to think critically and understand experiences beyond their own. I think that's sort of the core beliefs of liberal arts education. And we need more people who have that. We need more people to embrace it. And I'm hopeful. I think our country has rebounded from things far worse than what happened on January 6th. I'm a lover of history, and I think back to our country survived the Civil War period. We came out, I think, a stronger nation for it. And I think the last number of years have been a wake-up call for a lot of people that we need to look at one another differently. And I think you're exactly right. Higher education and education in general are a critical piece of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. My takeaway from listening to you, I'm really going to focus on, understanding people who don't necessarily have the same beliefs as you. So that kind of empathy, but just understanding as well, is really important. Really, really important. Well, Delegate Solomon, Jared, it is such a pleasure to be able to talk with you tonight, and thank you for your leadership for the state of Maryland and for Montgomery County. And I hope we can continue to learn from you, and I know we'll continue to work with you on building a stronger and more sustainable USG 2.0 as well. So thank you.
And thank you, and we're really lucky to have you here. So we're so glad you're in this new role, and look forward to working really closely for many years ahead.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.